everybody, today we're going to talk about shame and trauma and why they are so deeply connected. Before we jump into this very important topic, are you new to my channel? Welcome! I release videos on Mondays and on Thursdays, so make sure you're subscribed and have your notifications turned on so you don't miss out. As always, let's first begin by defining the two terms. Now, shame is defined as a painful feeling of humiliation or distress caused by the consciousness of wrong or foolish behavior. But I find that many people confuse shame with guilt. Maybe it's because they both cause us to feel bad about ourselves, but they are very different. And I think it's important to highlight that before we really get into this any further. Now, guilt is when we judge our behavior as being negative or wrong. Our behavior, remember that. Meaning that if I told someone that I would pay them back, but I didn't, I could feel guilty about it because I feel that what I did, or more importantly didn't do, was wrong or inconsiderate. Now, shame, on the other hand, is when we view ourselves as being bad or wrong. It's much deeper than guilt, and it can't be fixed by simply making amends or, following through with what you said you would do. As you can see, guilt can in some ways motivate us to be better and to make amends. Shame isn't motivating, and in most cases it can actually be debilitating. It can cause us to believe terrible things about ourselves and our situation, and in turn make our mental health issues even worse. Many of my patients and viewers have shared how shame has made them act in more self-destructive ways, whether it be sabotaging relationships or engaging in self-injurious behavior. Guilt is about our actions, and shame is about ourselves. Therefore, shame is something that we need to understand so that we can process it and remove it from our lives. Also, as I was doing research, I've heard shame described as a developmental trauma, meaning that it doesn't occur immediately following the traumatic event, but it grows over time. It develops over time, especially if the traumas repeat or if our PTSD symptoms go untreated. Now moving on to trauma. It is defined as a deeply distressing or disturbing experience. In order for someone to be traumatized, they have to fear for their life or the life of someone else. These can be big events, big traumas or big T's, or a bunch of smaller events or little t's, but they can all lead us to struggling with the symptoms of PTSD. And if you want more information on PTSD or what it is, you can click the link in the description for my video all about it. Now that we know the definitions of both shame and trauma, let's get into why they are so connected to one another. I personally believe that shame is only linked to certain trauma experiences. Now, I could be wrong, and you're more than welcome to share your thoughts in those comments down below, but just hear me out for a minute, because I believe that shame is only associated with traumas that we feel we are responsible or could have stopped. This is obviously dependent on our own personal experience during or after that traumatic event, but if we feel that we could have or should have done something to stop it, we can feel full of shame as a result. Because think back to the definition of shame and how it can cause us to feel that we are just wrong or bad. And if we felt that we could have done something to stop the trauma from occurring or did something to cause it, of course we would struggle with feelings of shame. Does that make sense? Now, research has shown that when we experience shame as a result of trauma, it can lead us into having more unhealthy coping skills, such as excessive alcohol use, complete avoidance, or self-injurious behaviors, which can interfere with our ability to process the emotions that we associate with the traumatic event. Think about it, like drinking a lot is going to numb us out. If we're using self-injurious behaviors, we talked about this being an unhealthy coping skill and a way to kind of express how we're feeling differently or numb out from all that we may be experiencing, so we just focus on that. And this inability to process emotions may then contribute to the development or intensification of our PTSD symptoms. Also, since shame can be so debilitating and stigmatizing, we're less likely to even reach out for professional help and support when we need it most. And additionally, they believe that shame is born out of the freeze state that trauma can put us in. Because when we're so overwhelmed and traumatized that we feel frozen and unable to move or help ourselves, we can slowly begin to believe that what happened was all our fault because we didn't do anything to stop it. And that's how shame becomes toxic and impedes our ability to process through things and move forward. It doesn't help us see how our actions are affecting others or motivate us to change, which, guilt can actually do. Instead, it causes us to isolate, believe that it's all our fault, and something is completely inherently wrong with us. Now, there is so much I could talk about when it comes to trauma and shame, but I want to make sure I leave some time to talk about how we can heal from it and move past the shame that we may feel, because we can. And number one, Because we're dealing with trauma and possibly some unhealthy coping skills, we'll need to gather our healthy and helpful resources first. Research shows us that the freeze state happens because we don't really know what else to do in that moment, and it pushes us out of our resilient zone. You remember I did that video with Alexa a while ago? And so when we do that, when it pushes us out, it's because we don't have any resources to help us out. So in order to even consider talking through all we may have been through and that traumatizing situation, we're going to need to have internal resources available to us at all times. These aren't distraction techniques or healthy coping skills. These are resources within ourselves and in other people in our lives. For example, a resource could be your amazing sense of humor, or your compassion for others, or your closest friend or pet, or a safe space that you have where you can go and you can relax and feel okay. Anything like that. So any resource that you could use to help you better manage any of the hard and icky stuff we know can come up, when we're going through and talking through the trauma. You need to be able to go to that happy place or to use that sense of humor to keep you present and help you continue to push through. And your therapist should also be a resource, but it can take a while for us to feel safe enough to call them that and know that we feel safe in their office. It takes us a while to feel okay, but coming up with resources can take many sessions. So be patient as you put together the ones that work for you. Next, or number 2, is mindfulness and grounding. When we've been traumatized and are struggling with intense feelings of shame, it can be hard to stay present. This could mean that we're unable to stay in our body, and so we'll dissociate, or that we struggle to stay in the present time and have a hard time discerning past from present. And I put these two tools together because they work really in tandem. Now first, think about it. With mindfulness, we have to begin feeling all that comes up for us in our body, as well as what emotions we feel. This can start by simply tracking your feelings with feelings charts. I've talked about that a lot. So you can print those off. You can Google them online and print off a feelings chart. But it helps to track that first and then progress to how an emotion feels in your body. Where is it? What sensation do you feel? Etc. And it can take some time, but the better able we are to recognize the feeling and actually allow ourselves to feel it and move through it and stay present, the better able we'll be to talk through our trauma and start to heal. And also, because we have to be present in order for our brain to have the chance to reprocess at all. Talked about that when it comes to EMDR, that we have to be present in order for it to work. And that's why figuring out what grounding techniques, remember these work in tandem, right? Mindfulness and grounding. It's important to figure out what grounding techniques work for you, and that will help you so much in this process. And remember, grounding techniques could be snapping rubber bands on your wrists, stomping your feet, clapping your hands, counting the colors in a room. Connecting to what we feel in our body and connecting that with the grounding technique can help us focus on that area and can be so life-changing during our trauma reprocessing. Next, or number 3, explore the trauma and situations that created shame for you. Because shame is often attached to a lot of other uncomfortable emotions and could be what's keeping us held in our PTSD response, we have to figure out what situations caused us to feel shameful. Now, obviously, this needs to be done slowly and carefully, but your therapist should walk you through and help you see the other side of the encounter. Perhaps we aren't taking into consideration why someone would do that to another person. Is that person an egomaniac? Maybe they're acting out of their own pain or shame. Would they have done this to us or someone else no matter what we did, essentially taking the responsibility off ourselves that can lead to shame? Taking the time to reframe what happened can help us acknowledge how we felt, instead of what we usually try to do is try to just brush it off, push it down, and ignore it. And I know talking through each encounter that may have caused us to feel shame can seem really, really tedious, but it's important that we do it so that we can see the other side of it and then be able to let it go. It can also help to talk out what other emotions come up for you when you do this. So maybe you feel anger and shame. Adding in an emotion word to the shame can help us better connect with what we're feeling. Again, going back to the tip before this about mindfulness. Acknowledging that we felt other emotions can be clues to our healing as well. Now next, or number 4, developing new and healthier relationships and ways to protect ourselves. Shame often gets passed around from hurt person to hurt person because it's often too difficult to deal with. So instead of dealing with it, we inflict it upon others. One article I read called Shame a Hot Potato. And I kind of like that analogy because it gets passed around. We're like, oh, I hate this. It feels terrible. You take it. And so we push it onto other people. But once we figured out where the shame came from, the situations, the people, the traumas we may have experienced, and we're able to safely reframe these situations to see it wasn't in fact our fault and there isn't anything inherently wrong with us, then we can develop healthier coping skills in relationships, starting with our therapeutic relationship. And you can do role play within sessions to practice communication skills, come up with self-care tools and techniques, and work together to recognize any of the clues that we may be slipping into old habits. Now, I know all of that may seem like a lot of work, and in truth it is, but I always think it's important that we know it can and will get better. Finding the right therapist, possibly a trauma specialist, is imperative, as well as being patient with your process. Trauma work takes time, and what's most important is that you feel supported as you are challenged, but not pushed to move too fast. And that's why resourcing was the first step I mentioned. We need to feel supported and safe while we do all the work we're going to need to do in order to heal. This video has been brought to you by the Kenyans on Patreon. If you would like to support the creation of these mental health videos, click the link in the description and check it out. But as always, I want to hear from you. Did I leave out an important step? Was there something else that helped you? Do you think shame and trauma aren't really linked at all? Let me know in those comments down below, and I will see you next time. Bye.